Hey everybody, another weekend of crazy heat here in Southern California, so once again this podcast will be making a donation to Water Drop LA, an organization providing cold water to unhoused people on Skid Row here in Los Angeles. To learn more and donate, go to waterdropla.org. Now here's the rest of the show. Hello, and welcome to Stay for Dinner, a podcast of cooking, curiosity, and conversation. If you love cooking, hate cooking, you have no idea how you feel about cooking because you've never tried it before, congratulations, you are in the right place. The place at the moment is my small apartment kitchen in Los Angeles. I am DC Pierson. I am a comedian, author, and enthusiastic home cook, and I am trying to be a little bit more quiet than usual because Haley, my wife, is phone banking in the other room, and so I am trying to make it sound like she is not calling from an insane asylum where a guy in the other room is screaming about wings. Because we're making wings today on the show, or drumsticks, I guess. Chicken pieces glazed in a delicious, sweet, and somewhat spicy sauce. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's see, what are we? I feel a little bit dazed because it is a heat wave again this weekend in Southern California. Record temperatures. The whole premise of selecting this recipe was because it came up on Food 52 under like, hey, it's hot this weekend, don't turn your oven on. And I was like, oh, great, that sounds good to me. So I looked at the list and I was enticed by the Labor Day weekend-ness of, wings, basically, drumsticks. Again, whatever these are called. Not exactly buffalo wings. I'm gonna stop beating around the bush. I am making slow cooker bourbon barbecue drumsticks, and I am making them again, primarily because of that factor of the slow cooker. Not having to turn the oven on, I have to do a little bit of stove work at the very beginning, but I am just trying to get out of the kitchen as quickly as possible because it feels like we live in Dune this weekend. We are trying to stay inside as much as possible. I downloaded, there's an app called ISO today, and I don't even know what ISO means, but I heard about it on LA Podcast, a podcast that I really enjoy about local LA podcasting, but also a local podcast about LA politics and other just issues affecting Southern California, including utility policy, which is something I have very unlikely been finding myself interested in recently because it feels like where we're all headed is having to care about the power grid more than we ever necessarily wanted to, but maybe should have been all along. And anyway, on this app, you can see like the full load of California's amount of electricity that the entire power grid can deliver and how much is being used and how much they're predicting is going to be used. And it's really interesting, and it's basically a giant expensive way for me to feel like, okay, yeah, I should turn our window unit AC up to 78 for a couple of hours, and like feeling like I'm, it's my way of feeling like I can do anything about this crazy, weird graph on my phone that is in fact all of the energy in all of the state of California. Like I open it up and I go, got it, boss, I'm on it. And then I go turn the AC down and like to imagine that is somehow moving the needle. I guess that's just how I'm dealing with the current era that the world and California and everywhere seem to be moving into. We have another thing that's making it feel like Dune is our kitchen gets a ton of light, which is great. It gets a lot of light like all day, and that's normally fantastic, except this weekend it just means that like it's, you could have curtains. It's not enough right now. We saw our neighbors put aluminum foil over their windows, like fancy reflective aluminum foil. Now I'm talking really loud, like I said I wouldn't. and that was inspiring to us. So it was like, okay, we gotta do something to also just try to keep the heat out, because again, that's, just trying to keep your house cool so you don't have to heat it as much. So hopefully your, like, the fuses in the building won't blow, the extrapolating that all the way out to like your neighborhood, the state, whatever at large. We're just all trying to stay comfortable and stay cool and do our part. So we threw a bunch of cardboard over the windows in addition to any other covering that we may have, any other window dressing that we may have. It's just like, nope, let's just reflect as much. Let's just not even let any light whatsoever come in if we can help it. So that is what we have going on. It's a bunker-esque vibe. It's closer to bunkeriness than I would necessarily like, but I also feel like that's just what we got to do. We're a part of this, and before you know it, we'll be wearing, bodysuits that recycle our sweat into tubes that we can drink from. But until we get there, we're putting cardboard over the windows for right now. My guest on the show today is, speaking of science, I guess, ooh, I like that segue, Ali Bouzari, recommended by my friend Jacqueline Backus, playwright who was on the show a little while ago. Ali Bouzari is a food scientist, he is a researcher, he's an author, he writes a really, really cool column for the San Francisco Chronicle called House Made, that is this look inside how, cutting edge and leading restaurants and other culinary establishments are using food science to do what they do best. He has a book called Ingredient, all about the science of food and basically how to get the best out of various ingredients and how to make food do what you want it to do. Everything I have read by him is just super interesting, enticing, beguiling. Sometimes when I read food sciencey stuff, I know I should be like, this is great, because I love cooking and I want to be able to cook better, and I know that this is just trying to get me from A to B to understanding the science of why things happen in order to make them, ultimately the food better. Like, that's why, in addition to just being interesting, it's because you want to master what you're doing better and be able to figure things out for yourself and apply things. And normally what happens is when I read stuff like that, thinking like, this is gonna tell me how to do this better, my brain just completely shuts off. Like, something about when they start talking about how heat circulates and it goes here and it goes there and then that causes this molecule to, my brain just completely powers down. And the stuff that I've read by Ali doesn't do that. It is exciting, and it reminds you, and it is sort of infused with what we love about food, and making the food part and the science part feel like they are married, as opposed to sort of like, okay, you're now seeing the like just little man behind the giant Wizard of Oz head, It's not a sort of like Toto pulling back the curtain and you're disappointed thing. It is, if anything, like venerating what's cool about food. And I am super duper excited to talk to him. I particularly want to talk to him about fruit, but we'll get into that. I have fruit questions. But before we do that, let's get out of this kitchen as quickly as we possibly can. Let's make these slow cooker bourbon barbecue chicken drumsticks, shall we? Speaking of the food science of it all, before we do anything else, quick check of my ingredients. So we need 1 cup of ketchup. I have that. 1/4 cup of packed brown sugar. I can pack it in a second. Right now it's not packed, but I will. 1/4 cup of finely chopped onion. We'll be chopping that in a second. 3 tablespoons of bourbon. I have like the very tail end of a very old, not very old in the sense of like, oh, really old and fancy, but just a like bottle of bourbon that's been around a long time. That looks like 3 tablespoons. We'll see if we need to supplement it with some other kind of booze or something else. 1 tablespoon of yellow mustard. We are out of yellow mustard, so I'm just going to use Dijon, and 1/2 teaspoon of red pepper flakes. I have more red pepper flakes than that, and I will be using more red pepper flakes than that. I feel like, just based on my initial reading of the ingredients list and reading some of the comments, it seems like this recipe can potentially go a little sweet. So we'll be doing some things to try to bump up the spice level that you can do or not do if you are cooking along at home to your taste. So for the drumsticks themselves, 2 tablespoons of packed brown sugar, 2 teaspoons of onion powder, a teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of garlic powder, a teaspoon of chili powder, 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper, 8 chicken drumsticks, skinned if desired. I do not desire. Although here is where I get into one of my sort of hesitations or qualms about this recipe that we'll see if it gets addressed, but I don't really see a way to address it without robbing it of some of what is exciting about it, which is not having to make the kitchen even hotter than it is right now in its current state of like lockdown so the sandworms don't come get us. And that is, you just put the chicken drumsticks in the slow cooker. There's never any phase of like browning the skin. And that makes me a little bit nervous because I feel like the end result, and I don't super mind this honestly, but in general, I know that it is often not desired to have a more soft skin on cooked chicken. I still kind of like it. I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't super mind like skin that isn't super crispy on cooked chicken. I'm okay with it. So I'm gonna leave the skins on and we'll just see what happens. But ultimately, I just don't think there's any way that the skin is gonna be anything but somewhat soft. And again, that's okay with me. But we'll see what happens. Because I don't want to turn on the stove longer than I have to and brown a bunch of chicken off in like oil or something. That just doesn't sound fun right now. So we'll make the sacrifice. And then also calls for optionally celery and carrot sticks. We have some carrot sticks and we also have some, it doesn't call for this, it just basically says you can serve it with some reserved sauce, but we have a little bottle of ranch dressing that we got specifically for this purpose. I actually also really, with wings and drumsticks and stuff, or just wings, that's what I'm using wings to say like all the different types of things like this that you get. Blue cheese dressing is my favorite, but I kind of forgot. And also I think ranch is going to go great with this, but normally blue cheese is the go-to. Your mileage may vary. Oh, the other thing I was going to say is to bump up the spice level, in addition to all of the ingredients I just listed, I will also be employing a jalapeno. I'm going to be chopping that up and I think putting it in with the sauce to begin with, or maybe putting it in with the drumsticks when they cook. I'm not sure exactly what stage I'm going to be introducing it to. And then the other alteration I'm going to make is that instead of, in the recipe it just says, in a small saucepan, combine the first 6 ingredients through red pepper flakes, bring to boiling, reduce heat, simmer for 5 minutes, reserve about half the sauce for serving. I saw a comment that was like, yeah, you know, the onions don't really get broken down that much in that time, so especially if you're like reserving the sauce right away, you end up with a lot of like almost raw onions there at the end. I think some of that could probably be alleviated by really finely chopping them. Like I think that might have just been an onion size problem that person was having, but it does give me pause to just throw raw onions in and start like letting them boil with all this other stuff and not kind of sauteing them basically. And so I think what I'm gonna do is also, it's Labor Day weekend, it's a holiday. This is a fun treat meal. I'm gonna put a little butter in at the beginning and I am going to saute the finely chopped onions in the butter before I add the other ingredients. Might not be the orthodox version of the recipe, might be blasphemy for some reason I can't think of. I just can't imagine it being that bad though, is the thing. I don't see a whole lot of downside to that. When I think wings, I usually think butter, right? That's what we get in buffalo wings, is just like a whole lot of butter. So a little butter here I think is not going to hurt anyone. First things first, let's do our mise en place steps. I am going to finely chop this onion. So for a 1/4 cup of onion, I'm just kind of, I would say maybe 1/8 of a whole onion. Maybe 1/4? We'll see. This is like a medium onion. And I'm going to try to chop it really finely. All right, that looks like about a 1/4 cup, maybe a little bit more. Just almost minced. And then my only other step is I'm going to, again, not officially in the recipe, but going to cut up like half a jalapeno, the whole thing, I'm not sure. I mean, it's gonna cook for a long time. And in my experience, sometimes that the more cooked it is, the seems to like cook some of the heat out. I'm gonna do like half of the jalapeno, seeds and all. And it's a pretty big jalapeno too. And I think I'm gonna do it in at the beginning with the onions, so it's like a part of the sauce. And then this is where I'm going to go a little bit rogue and get out the saucepan that I'll be making the sauce in and sauteing a little bit of the onions and stuff in just like a tablespoon of butter. So I got the saucepan out, I just put it on medium heat, put my little tablespoon of butter in the saucepan, let that melt, and then add in the onions, and in my case the jalapeno. And I ended up putting my heat on like a medium-low. I'm just going to try to keep these moving as much as possible. Especially because they're chopped up so finely, I don't want them to scorch. That satisfying donk was the bourbon opening. Just measuring out my sauce ingredients, the ketchup, the bourbon, or apple juice, depending. I'd also be adding the onion to this, but it is already in there, obviously. Tablespoon of mustard, and the red pepper flakes. That now I may do just the normal amount, because I feel like I'm gonna have more spice in there from the jalapeno, but I'm gonna do about a teaspoon. And I feel like my onions have been sauteing. Onions and jalapeno have been sauteing long enough. Added my other sauce ingredients. Ketchup, the bourbon, the mustard. Woo! Strong booze hit. Smell-wise. Brown sugar. Damn. Red pepper flake. Hot diggity. Gonna mix that around. Woo! Suddenly smells like I'm at a college party. Stirred it around a little bit and it immediately a very nice barbecue sauce color. So I'm going to bring that to a boil, and it's not taking very long in this at all. And just stir it around, make sure nothing burns in there, because obviously it's really sugary, and I feel like that can burn easily, and also additional sugar from the booze, the ketchup, etc. See, that's sputtering. I'm going to bring the heat down here. Let it simmer. A lot of little bubbles in a lot of little places. It looks very swampy or volcanic with the little bubbles sputtering in the brownish reddishness. And then while that does its thing for about 5 minutes, I'm going to get out a small bowl and combine my next 6 ingredients. The rub for the chicken, which is brown sugar, 2 tablespoons brown sugar, 2 teaspoons onion powder, a teaspoon of salt, teaspoon of garlic powder, teaspoon of chili powder, and half a teaspoon of black pepper. And then it says to rub that all over the drumsticks. By the way, I only have 6 drumsticks and 2 flats, as they are called. That, you know, those little things that you get when you get chicken wings that are, it's the wings that aren't the drums. It's like the 2 parallel bones with the meat around in between. So it says to rub the seasoning over the drumsticks and then put the drumsticks in the slow cooker. I am going to put the drumsticks in the slow cooker and then just use the bowl of the slow cooker as like a mixing bowl. So just mix them around with my hands, because they're going to end up in there anyway. And again, the slow cooker is not on right now. I'm putting the drumsticks in the bowl of the slow cooker. I have to give myself credit on the butchery. 4 of these wings are from the grocery store, and 2 of the drumsticks are from the grocery store, and 2 are from a chicken that we already had that I cut the drumsticks off myself with poultry shears, and I gotta say, it looks pretty similar. Poultry shears are the greatest. Quick stir of my sauce again. The color looks really good. We'll see how it tastes in a second. So I have my wings in the bowl of the slow cooker, and I'm going to toss in the rub and then just kind of work them around, get them coated. Seems as good a way to do it as any to me. The sauce has been simmering for 5 or more minutes. Gonna taste it, see where it's at. It's good, nice spice level. And it is very sweet, but that's why I'm glad the spice is there. And it's a good sweetness, like it is that barbecue saucy sort of really, you know, like KC masterpiece kind of. I like it. Look, we like sugar, what can we say? Yeah, the sauce is good. I was almost gonna say, maybe I'll put all of the sauce in, but I think we're gonna want because it says to reserve half, put half in with the chicken. And I was initially skeptical, but I do think we're going to want to have some of this sauce just by itself to douse the wings with at the end. So with that said, I'm going to take half of the sauce, pour it on the wings in the slow cooker. And then again, I'm going to kind of, maybe not with my hands this time, but with a wooden spoon, just kind of toss them around. Get them kind of coated in the sauce. Okay, not going to put that spoon back in with the other sauce because it has raw chicken on it. I'm going to put the top on the slow cooker. And then it says cook on low 5 to 6 hours or high 2.5 to 3 hours or until chicken is tender. I'm going to put it on slow or low or both and check it in like 4 hours. All right, it has been almost exactly 4 hours. I think there's 1 minute until my timer goes off. The recipe called for doing, I think, like 5 to 6 hours on low, 2 to 3 hours on high. But point being, I did 4 hours. It smells really good, and it's about to smell much better once I take the top off. Yes, so it was cook on low 5 to 6 hours or on high 2.5 to 3 hours or until chicken is tender. We're about to check for the latter. Smells good. The main hits I'm getting aroma-wise when I take the top off are that kind of sugary barbecue sauce smell and then pepper, which is interesting because they didn't have a lot of pepper in there. Yep, that is looking good to go. A couple of the wings have done the thing where they, or the drumsticks rather, have done the thing where they separate, like the top starts separating almost lollipop style from the bottom of the leg, which usually is a visual indicator to me of like they're done if not overdone. So I think we'll be safe, but the one that I just cut into was very tender, cooked all the way through. So we're just going to serve these with some of that reserved sauce that I had in the fridge, and I meant to take it out because I don't want it to be too cold, but that's okay. It'll take me a second to get everything together. So while I'm thinking of it, I'm going to take it out of the fridge, and then in our case, we have some ranch dressing, we have some carrots, and it's just going to be a Labor Day weekend wing sensation. We have taken the cardboard away from the windows because the sun has gone down, and it's a party here on Arrakis Dune Desert Planet, and I hope you guys will enjoy. I have, in the interim between starting the wings and finishing them, actually had this conversation that you're about to hear with Ali Bouzari, and it was so great. It's going to be a little bit of a longer one, but he's a super, super interesting guy with a really unique perspective on food, and I really, really enjoyed talking to him. It was a blast. I learned a lot, and I think we could see him coming back again because I can tell that we're really only scratching the surface. And check out his book, Ingredient, wherever books are sold, and check out this conversation with Ali Bouzari. Ali Bouzari, thank you so much for joining me. If this were a normal, non-pandemic era episode of this podcast, I would be placing a plate of delicious food in front of you, or hopefully delicious food anyway. I don't know what it says about me that I feel the need to qualify the potential deliciousness of even theoretical non-existent food that I might make, but I am. But since this is not a normal episode and these are not normal times, as we were just discussing before we started recording, all I can do is wish that the last thing that you had to eat was delicious and satisfying.
Well, thank you. It was great, and that was a hell of a self-conscious qualification of imaginary food through the internet. That was good.
Thank you. That's pretty much the entirety of this podcast, and also the larger metaphor of this podcast is like how we view ourselves and like our own creative processes and stuff through sort of like, I guess, the metaphor of food. And I think what we're learning is that even if I'm imagining a thing that I might make but never will, I'm still a little bit like, I don't want to get ahead of myself and be like, it's good.
Food is a great ink blot test, so I'm totally down with that.
How do you feel like when you look at that ink blot, like what do you see? What does your own approach to food tell you about your process or yourself as a like creative person or a professional? What do you see when you look at that ink blot?
Chaos. uh, Truly, like I like, I guess to step back, I grew up with a bunch of really creative friends. Like my group of people in high school all ended up being recording artists and filmmakers and actors and engineers and architects, people who created stuff. And I was a little bit the linear, like, science thinker. And I mean, like, I also played music, but of course I played drums because it was like math music, and there were building blocks that I could own and not feel like I was too out on a limb and too exposed to the universe with my choices. And so for me, the thing I like about food is it's also a bunch of building blocks, but there is chaos on top of it. And so I guess everything I just said makes me sound like a really type A, super organized person. But I'm very floppy. And so like, I really enjoy, the improv side of food. And, for me, food is it's an edible mixtape that is going to change based on how tired I am or what the light looks like outside or, what the drive home smelled like. And so, yeah, there's no method. It's all madness.
It seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from everything of yours, all of you, of your work that I've checked out, it seems as though basically what you are trying to do, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the mission statement is almost like, let's like learn as much as we can about the science behind how food works. Just because it's like cool and interesting, but also because that will help us be able to do what we want to do with it.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's completely accurate. It's the purpose of, for me, the purpose of learning about science and food is it's a means to an end. I want to be able to just cook without having to worry about stuff that I may not know about. And so what I mean by that is I taught in a culinary school for a long time, and I was teaching 19-year-olds how to make hollandaise. And the way that old school, like very mustachy European culinary instructors would teach it is with a lot of fear and a lot of like angry mansplaining about what you should and shouldn't do, but without ever explaining why you should or shouldn't do those things. And it left a lot of people in the lurch, like tiptoeing around being like, oh, I hope the sauce doesn't break because I've been told it will, but never explained why. And so I guess my ultimate goal for anything science and food is to just free you up, like liberate you from the fear so that you can just cook and hang out with your friends and, try to seduce somebody or, try to make a point or try to change your parents' political views in the 11th hour on Halloween. Like whatever it is, I would love for life to be more able to flow through your brain when you're cooking rather than being like, oh my God, what was the fifth step in this recipe that I'm following? And if I added the lemon now, am I totally screwed? Or there's too much chaos in the world. I want there to just be less chaos in the brain while there is chaos in the pan.
Yeah, that
I've said chaos a lot so far, which it's a theme.
And I love it, and I have no idea what about our reality could possibly be inspiring that. We were just talking about before we officially got on that you're in the Bay Area and I'm in LA, and so we're both sort of like enshrouded in various versions of the sort of like coming climate apocalypse.
Yep.
And so we're it's feeling very like so that we're a little bit steeped in that right now, but there's so much to unpack in what you said. But one of the things that I really took away from it is the sort of like trying to still the interior chaos inside of you or in your own brain when you have like live food and fire. You have like, perishable food and fire and a thing that you're ultimately going to put in your body in front of you. And I do think that is such a stumbling block for a lot of people when they first start cooking. I know myself included, is feeling like I am going to, or I start doing this and I've read the recipe a few times, but then now it's like, this is all happening. And once I have everything going and in the pan and it's on a flame, it almost feels like it's careening out of control at all times. And all I can do is just like hang on and do the steps as I remember them. And if it's not looking the way I feel like it's supposed to look, or the recipe has led me to believe it's supposed to look, feeling like, oh shit, what am I doing wrong? And then that starts this whole, or exacerbates this whole internal churning self monologue of like, this is why I don't cook, and this is why I whatever, and blah, 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 where you're like narrativizing it too much. And I do think that once you start to get a little experience, it helps you not do that all the time and just kind of feel like, oh no, I'm enjoying this and this is fine. I can even feel like I can maybe carry on a conversation with somebody while I'm doing this, even if I'm not following a recipe. I think is so important.
Yeah, I mean, the way you just explained it kind of made me think of, that is the point of driver's ed. Like, the point of learning how to drive a car is so that you can just drive. And even in situations where you don't know exactly where you're going, you can still look around, you can still listen to music, you can still enjoy the scenery. And the basic principles of driving a car are kind of already going to be on lock. Like, you're not going to crash, even if you end up at a used Honda dealership in Stockton. Maybe that's not where you want to go, but you got there alive, and there was never really a touch and go moment where you didn't know if survival was no longer on the table. And that's kind of my goal with science and food, is like, take the stress out of it. You know that sugar is only going to do a couple things. There's really not that much it can do to surprise you. And once you get that, it doesn't matter if you're quartering an apple to have with peanut butter, or you're figuring out some really complicated thing from a cookbook you've never tried before. It should all inspire the same low level of like, oh, okay, my brain's humming, and that's about it.
It almost feels like, similarly, and I say this as somebody that has I don't currently play an instrument. I played alto sax in middle school band because we got out of PE if we were in band.
I started playing alto sax in middle school band as well.
Well, there you go. Did you stick with it? What was your journey with that?
I flipped over to drums when jazz band was a thing you could do. So in our really overachiever suburban Colorado middle school, it was like a very competitive musical environment from day one in sixth grade. So I was actually unsuccessful in my audition to try to become a drummer when I'd never played drums before as a sixth grader. So I took private lessons for 3 years. And then finally, successfully was anointed drummer in 8th grade in jazz band. And so sax fell by the wayside, and I had a lot more heavy crap to lug around. But it was therapeutic. Well, so in the end, I think it won out.
So that would saxophone was merely your I'm biding my time instrument.
It was a cool idea.
Close to band and keep tabs on things.
Yeah, it was a cool idea, but truly there are a lot of virtues to a lot of different instruments at all stages of being good at them. But I really wanted to just Saturday Night Live goodbye song wail. Sure. And so that seemed really, really far out of reach after the first couple of years of playing Purple Haze and 2 other songs on a saxophone. So yeah, the idea of sax, I think, is way more fun than the reality of how long it takes to get that good.
I would agree with that. My Purple Haze, my song that is cool by itself, but is a poor fit for solo alto sax as played by a 7th grader, was the Imperial March from Star Wars.
Oh yeah, that was another classic one.
I was
told in middle school and high school, like, oh yeah, and then obviously everybody's going to take their stuff home and practice. And I was even getting like, I had like lessons for a while, and I just, was being told like, and then, yeah, you should be practicing at home, and nodding along like, oh yeah, of course I'm going to do that. And then pretty much wouldn't. And any time I would be like, well, I guess I have to kind of like tick this box, I would just take my saxophone out, sit, put my book of Star Wars music in front of me on the music stand, play the Imperial March like 3 times through, and be like, well, I practiced.
Yeah,
great.
done.
That was awesome.
Scratch the itch. Send tweets.
But I was, which is which is the instrument equivalent of like only going to church on Christmas and Easter, I think, pretty much. But all of that to say, basically, I guess what I was trying to get to was, it seems like what you're describing is like why people are supposed to like learn their scales before they can really be good at an instrument, is this sort of like, you want to get the rudiments down, and that's going to be the thing that allows you to have freedom. Ultimately, it's like you want to absorb all of this information and these habits and these techniques, and then ultimately the goal is to be able to forget about them, but only because they're so ingrained.
Yeah, exactly. It's a system, and with literally anything I can think of that's creative, you learn the system, and sometimes the system is really complicated, like rudiments in drums or scales in a musical instrument. Sometimes it's really straightforward, like grammar and things that are already built into your curriculum if you want to be a writer. And from then on, you can create. And, we can get into all the douchey, high-minded, artists' conversations about the creative muse from there. But like, the beauty is you can get to that point if you are not wondering, oh my God, what's going to happen to this fish if I wait an hour to start cooking it?
What is going to happen to it?
Probably nothing. Maybe it'll get a little bit smellier. I once had a chef. I once worked for a chef who told me that for every hour you leave a fish out at room temperature, it's like it aged 4 days in the fridge, just as a way to like yell at me as a young line cook to put your fish away. Which, going back on it now with years of chemistry under my belt, not exactly true, but like a really good message that fish and stuff that tends to smell fishy quickly, keeping it colder helps slow down its aging, which seems like really a straightforward thing, but like it's a total line cook thing to like leave doors open on reach-in coolers and not put stuff back right away because you're busy with other things. And my chef was saying like, we're paying many dollars a pound for this salmon. Don't be an idiot. So yeah, that always stuck in my head.
So that raises the question for me of like, what really kind of came first for you? Was it cooking? Was it science? Was it sort of like both at the same time? How did you evolve into being the person you are now?
Yeah, it was both at the same time. I think I thrive on the borderlands as a hybrid. Like in college, drumming transitioned into salsa dancing because I used to play timbales in a salsa band, and I'd watch people dance and I'd be like, I have 10% of the athleticism, coordination, and innate flexibility in my hip flexors to do what's happening here, but I have like a hack where I probably understand the rhythms of what's going on better than anybody on the dance floor. So I was able to be a really passable dancer and a really passable timbale player, and together it was a cool new thing. Same sort of thing with food. Like, I don't really have the interest in losing all the cartilage in my knees to pursue like accolades running a restaurant. And I don't really have the attention to detail to ever try to get like a fancy science award. But bringing them both together, I really liked chemistry in high school. I really liked cooking. It felt like a combo that would play off itself well and kind of give itself its own feedback. And one side of one made the other side better. And I mean, the food side for me was ingrained since I was a kid because my dad was from Iran, and almost to a point of like comedy, everything we did as a family was centered around food. Like, we would pick out which resorts we would go to on like, our once a year family vacation based on who had the best food or was near the best food. After dinner, my dad would frequently like clap his hands together and be like, "All right, what's for dinner?" Like all the stupid dad jokes in our family were food centric, and then I mean there were some practical skills as well. Like his version of like the talk to pubescent me was, "Let's go to a grocery store and I'm gonna show you how to pick ripe fruit." It was like, looking back, there was levels to that conversation, but he literally was showing me like how to never buy a bad apple again, or how to tell if a watermelon's going to be good. And so the food stuff was there in the background in all kinds of apparently very Freudian ways. And then the chemistry stuff, I liked understanding how stuff worked. Again, I still think that I'm not necessarily an innately free associative creative person in the way, at least that a lot of my friends that I admired who had that whatever that gene was. So understanding the framework of how stuff works feels like a safety net for me. And so I really enjoyed chemistry. I really enjoyed learning about how one set of ideas explains why mahogany-based drums sound different than maple-based drums. And I really liked how that same base of ideas explained how a car works and how rainbows work and like what happens when you scrape your knee and it scabs. Like there was something really cool about seeing the matrix, because I think I took my first chemistry class in '99. So it was like literally seeing the matrix was on my mind. And putting them together didn't really happen until I didn't get into grad school. I was like, oh shit, what do I do now? I thought I was going to be a biochemist, and I applied to all these chemistry grad programs and didn't get in literally anywhere. I was like, okay, maybe I'll just cook for a while. And so I took a year off and worked full time in a fine dining restaurant, and then had a really sweaty dream one night. And I woke up and I Googled food chemistry PhD, and there were like 3 or 4 programs that came up. I was like, oh, I could do that. And there was one here at Davis, UC Davis, that was, I think, top 1 or 2 food science programs in the country. And I was like, oh man, I could be in California. I could be like nearer to the ocean than I've ever lived, living in Denver my whole life. I could be right next to the Culinary Institute of America. I could be right next to all these amazing restaurants that I was fanboying over. And I kind of just bit by bit started to realize that I cared more about food than people who were in food science. Because I don't know if you've ever like talked to a food scientist before. They generally suck. Like they're generally people, that's unkind, but true. I'll double down. Food scientists are generally people who don't really have much interest in food. They're typically people who would have been just as happy like studying, I don't know, polymers in plastic cups, but landed on polymers in a watermelon. And they're just like really dry and like, I don't know, asexual. Like they feel like they reproduce by budding because there's almost no passion in what they do and how that side of the industry has been carried out for, I don't know, since World War II. And so I met all these food scientists, and some of them obviously were exceptions to this horrible generalization I've just given as an intro for an entire field of science. But I met some people who were really great, but by and large, it was a lot of people who didn't really get why I was geeking out about my favorite restaurants, or like why I was so excited to go to a California farmers market after growing up in South Metro Denver, where there was a farmers market like twice each year. And then they were like, fuck you, winter. And it was a really interesting awakening to be in this place with all of this cool stuff going on. Just the fabric of the food existence was so colorful in California, and being surrounded by scientists who really didn't care about it, but were learning more about it than almost anybody else. So I was like, I'm going to bring these two together and try to see if there's more that you can squeeze out of it.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. When you use the term food scientist, I do immediately think of that one scene. Did you watch Breaking Bad?
Oh, yeah. I actually put off watching Breaking Bad when I was in grad school. jokingly because I was worried it would give me bad ideas. But it was just like way too busy. And actually, the very, very, very thin silver lining of pandemic, I've binged all of it with my wife in the past like month, and now we're halfway through Saul. So yes, I'm ready for your Breaking Bad reference without spoilers.
This will be all too fresh for you.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
The scene, it was a cold open in, I feel like maybe the second to last season or even the last season, where it's one of those really great sort of Breaking Bad cold opens where you have no idea where you are or how it connects to the main story.
Mm-hmm.
And we see all of these like intense, frowny German scientists, and they're, there's one guy that is sort of sampling, the stuff that they've made, and you realize, oh, these are food scientists. And there's the one scientist who's like, yes, this one is like a combination of French dressing and ranch. We call it Franche.
Yep.
And it's just a super sterile environment. Everybody's very, dour. And that is kind of sometimes what I think. Now I think like there have been examples of people that are, yourself included, blending food and science in sort of like an interesting, fun way, in a way that people who cook can actually use. And obviously there are lots of chefs now who are sort of very, I want to do cool sciencey stuff and molecular gastronomy and all that, like it seems like a growing field of using science to actually make people that are excited about food more excited about food. But I can imagine that for so many years, and probably still even to this day, most of the money in food science is how can we like save an extra half a cent on every like bag of Cheetos that we make as like a giant multinational corporation. That is sort of what I imagine.
So spot on. That cold open was weird to see such an obscure field get nailed so perfectly. Like of all the things that happen in that show, like there's so many things about the filmmaking, about the casting, about like the pacing of the seasons that people, have and will continue to write like blogs about forever. That one thing, as a person who has lived through that industry, like they could do anything. They nailed it so perfect. It was like, that was the Goodfellas razor blade garlic moment of the field of food science. It was like, it was so spot on. And yeah, that has been food science. It's a field that was created, I think around World War II, where it was like, we have an unprecedented need to feed people in different situations. Food needs to be stable. It needs to be safer than it has been. I mean, it's a really important mission of bringing food to more people, and therefore having to figure out how to make it last for longer. That's great. But for me, it's that side of it is alone really hard to fall in love with. And so my friends and colleagues in the industry, we refer to what we do as culinary science, which is food science and all the knowledge that's there. But instead of, I'll put it this way, my PhD was on mashed potatoes. I have a PhD in mashed potatoes.
What was your thesis? What did you have to sit in front of people and defend?
How do you make really good mashed potatoes? I told I came to this with a plan. So I got to do it collaborating with chefs at the French Laundry, Thomas Keller's restaurant in the Napa Valley, which I think hits a little different in the middle of the pandemic, but back then it was a more innocent time. But so I got to work on mashed potatoes, being inspired by questions asked by some of the most potato famous chefs at one of the, pinnacle American restaurants. And I mean, of course, on the science side, I was looking at how starch and the little cell walls in the potato and the temperature that you cook it at and how it interacts with fat. I was looking at like all the variables in what happens when you cook potatoes and how you can create different textures in mashed potatoes. So how do you make the perfect mashed potato that's not too gummy, not like chewy, not papery and dry feeling, but is like smooth and creamy and feels like melted ice cream, but salted, buttery potatoes. And we figured it out in about 6 weeks. Like pretty much straight to the point. That was the culinary science part. The following 3.5 years were spent like chasing it down narrower and narrower holes to try to prove without really any more reasonable doubt that exactly this mechanism and exactly this pathway and exactly this part of the cell wall and exactly this enzyme was involved in X, Y, and Z. And it was this kind of thing where I was like, it was so cool 3.5 years ago when we were like, well, we did it. Here's just a mashed potatoes that will straight up do your taxes for you. Like, this is it. And then food science is really so concerned with scientifically the really important fundamentals that you kind of forget how to make really good mashed potatoes after 4 years. And so culinary science is standing on the shoulders of giants, truly. It's standing on the foundation of food science, making it more digestible, not like hammering you over the head with sciencey jargon and complicated, intimidating bullshit, and coupling that to a chef's hands and an interest and a desire and a skill set for slicing things precisely and smelling and seasoning and tasting and foraging and all the chefy buzzwords with science, I would argue is better. And you bring up molecular gastronomy, which it's interesting. That is usually where people start when they hear about science and cooking. My line for a long time to like get old school chefs not to hate me right off the bat has been, no. I swear to God, there is more fundamental, interesting, cool science going on in roasting a chicken or poaching an egg or literally peeling a carrot than there is in like making a foam and putting it on top of centrifuged ice cream or some crazy bullshit like that. Like,
sure, because when you see it, and it's like, I'm also my wife and I are both avid Top Chef viewers and other culinary, like competition shows. And for so long, that's just been almost a type. Ever since the beginning of Top Chef and those shows, is like, I'm the molecular gastronomy guy, or I'm the big sciencey guy who's doing really cool stuff. And it's literally only ever hit it with liquid nitrogen, hit it with agar. Yep. That's it. Pretty much, like, there's pretty much only it's like being like, I don't know what a good example. It's like being like, I'm a wizard, and then literally the only thing you ever do is like a trick of like pulling a coin out from behind somebody's ear. You know what I mean?
This is me wading into unfamiliar territory a little bit, but I would imagine it's what some of the commentary is on directors in Hollywood who are like obsessed with these like muscular tracking shots that last for 2 hours, and like there is technical mastery. And what's interesting is I wonder if, 10 years after this past Oscar season, if it's going to go through the same game of telephone as what has happened with agar and lecithin and all these things, where like the first time, again, that Goodfellas Copacabana scene, like, blew everybody's minds. And if you had eaten at WD-50 or El Bulli in Spain or any of these places like in the early 2000s, it literally made people weep. And not like food writers, but just like people who were like, oh my God, this took me back to my childhood and like gave me that ratatouille moment in a way that I never expected. And now that just has been taken so far that it's like, instead of sun-dried tomatoes or bacon-wrapped scallops or whatever the like 90s food cliche is, now you have like really sciencey feeling food cliches. And so the molecular gastronomy thing as style has always felt weird because it kind of missed the point, where it was like, yes, this turning something into a shape that it's not naturally can be a really cool way to surprise somebody and delight them. Like, oh, I've never had spaghetti and tomato sauce that looked like this. Cool. But if that becomes the whole point, then it truly feels like sideshow, like close-up magic, where you're like, this feels a little hokey. And so the science in like a show like Top Chef, I actually, Padma blurbed the book that I wrote, because we had the same editor, and he called in a favor. It was this amazing moment that teenage me, who was ever locked away in a drawer somewhere, was like, oh my God, this is the greatest day of my life. So Padma blurbed the book, and my counter, like my like raise was like, cool, great. Now I would love to come in and coach all of the contestants on your next season of Top Chef of basically how never to be surprised again. Still waiting to hear back on that. That was 4 years ago. But
never be surprised again, meaning what?
Meaning like I think you said it perfectly. There's always like one or two people on every season of Top Chef who are like the sciencey guy. And it's almost always a guy, and he's almost always white, and he's almost always got a lot of gel. And what's interesting is some of the true favorites and some of the like masters and some of the real standouts from each season all already think really analytically. They already think about their creative process and steps. They have like this perfect platform. And I think that anybody, regardless of your skill set, regardless of what kind of food you want to cook, if you just know basically in your guts, like what proteins are going to do and what sugar is going to do and what fat is going to do, you're never going to be surprised when you open up the market basket and there's like gooey duck or I don't know, seal or chameleon tail or, you know, some crazy fern that nobody's ever seen before, because they're all just made of carbs and protein and fat, and all of those things, as wild as it sounds, all of those things just follow the same patterns. And so I thought it would be really fun if, for Top Chef specifically, since catching people off guard is such a part of that show's DNA, how interesting it would be if you could try to like give people like boot camp in science of, again, like we don't even have to we don't even have to say the word science, because that can be a trigger for people who hated chemistry in high school. But basically like a how it works, like 3-day crash course in, you guys are already at the top of your craft. You already do amazing things. The goal of Top Chef is to put you through the ringer and push you to your limits so that you reach a breaking point. What if we could push people's breaking points even farther by equipping them with this cool hybrid skill set that makes them ready to handle whatever comes up? So yeah, also a huge fan of Top Chef.
Which, yeah, well, what you're describing is basically the sort of like the thesis statement of what you were talking about, of just being able to understand things enough that you no longer have to think about it. And basically it seems like kind of like thinking in metaphors, right? Like that I which is something that I feel like comes up across so many different disciplines, where it is just like, oh yeah, once you can get it in your brain to not know, like, okay, I have almost like a manual in my brain that I have memorized that says like, okay, then if it's this kind of thing, go to page 20. Okay, on page 20 it says with this type of thing, do this. But being able to sort of like have your own, navigational system in your head that goes like, oh, okay, I know that this thing is, I don't know exactly what it is, but it seems like a fattier other thing that I already know what it is. So I know how that behaves, and that plus more fat, I know how fat behaves. Now I have a pretty good idea of what I can do with this, how I can tackle it, and how I can fit it into the framework of like what I do is really cool and important. And I think is important like across so many different disciplines. And I think that we all have those things for ourselves where we go like, oh, well, this is science. I don't do that. I'm not good at that. So we just like shut down. Yeah.
When people think science, I me included, like a lot of times my brain goes to, Professor Frank or Chevy Chase in Christmas Vacation, which is another one that I was gonna bring up, of like the two times that food science has appeared in pop culture were Christmas Vacation with the cereal varnish and that cold open in Breaking Bad. But like that's where people's brains go. But like the way that it works for me is, I don't know, the first time I knew what cumin was when I was 8, and my dad and I were in the drive-thru at Taco Bell, and I would fucking house a handful of packets of mild sauce in my youth. Like I would absolutely just like, I would give myself, I probably wore away parts of my insides with how much of that stuff I would eat. And I would ask my dad one time, like, why, what is this? Why is this so good? He's like, it's just cumin and vinegar. And I was like, oh. And now to this day, like wherever I am for the rest of my life, I could be at a 3 Michelin star restaurant. I could be at a taco truck. I could be, in another hemisphere. If I taste cumin, I'm like, Taco Bell. And those connections of food from my past and nostalgia and all that stuff. That's what the whole point is. So when it comes to, do you remember when the internet freaked out about people putting mayonnaise on the outside of a grilled cheese?
I thought you were going to say peas and guacamole, but yes, go ahead.
I mean, I saw that. my bigger one is Antony from Queer Eye with the Greek yogurt and guacamole, but that's
yeah.
that's a different one. But so do you like that was the like story of Twitter for one day was, oh my God, mayonnaise on the outside of a grilled cheese. This is either really smart or the grossest thing ever. The whole point of everything that I'm talking about is I saw that and I was like, oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense. It's putting fat, which makes stuff crispy, on the outside of a sandwich where the point of it is to be crispy. And one of the issues with putting butter on a grilled cheese is if your butter's kept in the fridge, it's really hard to spread on the outside of the bread. It melts really quickly, and as soon as it melts, it drips away from the bread. Whereas the fact that mayonnaise has like egg yolks and stabilizers and all kinds of shit in it, it clings to your bread better, and it gives you like a more close, like crispy, shattery skin on the outside of your grilled cheese. And so all of the like science and all that sort of stuff, it's really just like a shortcut for intuition with food. And it doesn't have to be science. And like you said, it's a lot of it is metaphor. A lot of science is metaphor. Like we don't actually know what water molecules look like. All the like H2O and all the little diagrams and stuff, that's all just really swagless metaphor made up by scientists who really like straight lines and letters. And that could just as easily have been comic book illustration. It could just have easily have been musical analogies. Like there's so many ways to talk about the science of food. I am a huge fan of just kind of mixing the vitamins into the mashed potatoes, and giving people tools that they can use in the kitchen without being like, all right, everybody, put on your goggles. It's time to science. This is going to suck. I would rather just jump straight into here's how you keep an avocado from browning, and here's why it works.
Yeah, so that leads me to my next question. If there were, or do you have like things when you are trying to like teach people or even just sell them on the idea of employing a little bit of scientific knowledge or know-how to cooking? Do you have like, if there was one thing where you like this, I guess it's the equivalent of like one weird trick.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, do you have a thing that you're like, this is the thing that absolutely everybody can use and it's super simple and it's just like, will basically sell you on this idea? Like, do you, what is that for you? Or do you have like a few of them? Are there, what are they? Is it keeping an avocado from browning? Because I just keep it in there with the pit in it, and it sometimes works and sometimes doesn't.
The pit does nothing.
Oh no!
Yeah.
No. Wow, I thought that was science too.
No, it kind of makes sense.
Science.
No. What I do, because obviously California, I'm typically taking an avocado and doing something lemony or limey with it, like putting it in a salad, making guac, whatever. There's always like, I don't know how you squeeze citrus, but I squeeze citrus, like really get in there. And it leaves these like shredded, I cut a lime or lemon in half, squeeze the shit out of it. There's like a couple of like beardy feelers of lime pulp or lemon pulp left on the outside. Mm-hmm. And all I'll do is if I have a half or a quarter or whatever of an avocado, I sort of like barber brush shaving cream the rest of that lime pulp onto the outside of the avocado, and has yet to fail. Stick it back in the fridge. It like that thin layer, and I actually think the rubbing of a little bit of the leftover pulp and juice coats the entire outside of the avocado in acid. The whole reason avocado is brown is because there's an enzyme. There's a little mini protein that as soon as you cut open the cells of an avocado by cutting it, it starts to grab air from the atmosphere and turn things brown. So you have a couple options. You can vacuum seal your avocado to keep the air away, because everybody in a 400 square foot apartment has a chamber vacuum sealer from straight out of Top Chef that they can use. Or more practically, you can just kill the enzyme. and the enzyme is super pH sensitive, and so all it takes is a squeeze of lemon, rubbing a lime on it, vinegar. Like literally all you have to do is just wage a little bit of chemical warfare on it and then stick it back in the fridge. I've gone out of town and come back after a week, and avocado's still very usable.
Wow, no shit. The pit does nothing.
The pit does
I've
nothing.
Been throwing pits into like, oh, okay, we have some of this guacamole left over.
Yeah.
You're not, but that's the thing about these weird, I guess, essentially folk wisdom-y things, is that I still do it even though I've seen it not really work that well, because I'm like, oh, maybe it just didn't, a couple too many days went by or whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like I do it anyway.
Which is not to like cast aspersions at folk traditions in food, because most of them are right. Like people were doing stuff in like South Korea with fermentation kimchi that would take like literally generations of microbiology PhDs to figure out what the hell is going on. They were doing that pre-electricity, and there was like very truly advanced microbial farming going on before we had any idea that microbes were a thing. So there's a lot of like folklore that's really important and really helpful, but the avocado pit thing is not one of them. Like if you're going to a party, if there ever are parties again, and you're bringing guac, a really simple thing, again, the one weird trick, make your guac. Typically it's going to go into a bowl. Instead of just like leaving it in the bowl, take a little cake spatula and Zamboni it down to like a perfect like flattened surface so that you minimize the nooks and crannies that are exposed to oxygen. And then maybe if you want to be a real overachiever, one more squeeze of lime on top that's not mixed in yet, and just leave it there, press some like plastic wrap down on it. I have a feeling it's going to last for hours, and in the refrigerator, maybe a couple days.
How about that? Yeah, that's so interesting. And there does seem to be a lot of, I was reading your article that I would love to talk about more,
Sure.
but about Chez Panisse and just being about fruit and how it ripens. And I was realizing in reading that article and just in different stuff and in thinking about like sourdough starters, because my wife, like many people, has a sourdough starter, although unlike many people, hers is still going strong, and she makes sourdough every week, and it's so good. God. And it's just getting better.
You did it.
And
your household has achieved Instagram's ideal for the pandemic. It's awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, I saw a headline, a Food and Wine headline today or tweet or whatever that was like, move over sourdough, it's ice cream's turn. And I just thought, like, if you had shown this to anyone in any previous year, where they would be like, what is that? Why are those in competition with each other?
Real quick on sourdough, do you guys cook the pieces of the starter that you discard? Or are you throwing them away?
We had this weekend for breakfast both days. She makes a starter discard pancake, like in the oven. That is great.
Have you ever done it savory?
No, we haven't. I have a recipe for kimchi pancake, like starter kimchi pancake, that I would really like.
I have no doubt that would be amazing. Our move has been equal parts cheese of whatever your favorite kind of cheese is and sourdough starter, and kind of mix it into a batter and pan fry it in butter. It's like a Cheez-It went to college and like had its heart broken and like gained a deeper understanding of the human cheese existence and came back to tell you about it. Like it is deeply savory and umami and crackly. It'll turn your lights on.
Sold.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely sold. Oh, that sounds phenomenal. Yeah, it really is just kind of this, I think, like, well, I'm getting off of my main point here, but there is something about sourdough starter that is just truly like, it's like it's all the things that make it, I think, like annoying and fidgety and weird for people are also the exact things that make it great. Where like, if you're in a rhythm like she's in right now, where it's like, well, we're in quarantine, we're not really going anywhere, we're just around the house, and all of our other rhythms are disrupted. So you just have this rhythm of like, well, I know that when we're almost out of bread, I'm going to get it out from the fridge where it's sleeping and I'm going to feed it again to wake it up. I'm going to have to discard some. So then we make like the pancake usually like over the weekend that we can eat for breakfast both days. And it makes like a lot of food. And then I make the bread and then we have the bread for the next week. And then the starter goes to sleep again until I need to wake it up. It's all of that stuff where it's just like, it's this organism. You have to keep track of it. You have to throw some away. You have to do whatever, where it's like, if your life is syncing up right with it, all of the things that make it sort of like, oh crap, I forgot about that make it great and cool and like a member of our household in a weird way.
And it fills some of those like vacant voids in your heart of feeling like you accomplished a thing in a day. I don't know. Maybe I'm projecting, but like,
I mean, I think there's no question that that's been a huge part of it for a lot of people. Yeah. Absolutely. And yeah, I feel I've come to feel the same way about like finally getting up and running with keeping like bones and chicken scraps and veggie scraps in the freezer and then actually making stock with them and going like, oh yeah, all this shit that I would throw away otherwise, there's still great stuff in here and I can use it to make a thing that I need and would normally spend money on, is such a cool feeling. But it's sort of like you have to sort of be up and running and be in like a rhythm with that thing. And it's easier to do right now because everything else is disrupted. So you have the time to like do it if you want to.
I mean, that is truly the secret ingredient in all restaurants that is known by all cooks is momentum. Like the reason that restaurant food is so amazing and the reason they're able to bring so much stuff together is because the meal that you're eating, they've been working on it for a week. And bit by bit, they've been like making condiments and making the base of the stock and roasting the bones for this thing that goes into the other thing. And all most good organized restaurant kitchens are during service is assembling. And yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying, that it's so much easier to cook at home when you have a head start and when you have momentum. And the flip side of that is there is nothing, like truly nothing harder in the culinary food world than coming back to a restaurant after it was closed for like 3 days. Like it is the craziest scramble from scratch that you've ever seen, because there's definitely going to be service that night, because at no point in history has a restaurant been able to survive just like a full prep day to get caught up. But like if a restaurant's closed for, a week for the holidays, or if you're closed for construction, or if there's a power outage or whatever, coming back after like 2 or 3 days, it is trying to like conduct a train while also building the track at the same time. And it's probably the feeling that a lot of people have cooking at home. Whereas now, again, just kind of being home, you can get something prepped up that you might not cook for 4 or 5 days. And you can have your nice roast chicken from Monday that gets turned into something on Tuesday, that gets turned into something on Wednesday. And then by Thursday, you're like, man, this has a lot of layers of complex flavor. Like, this is really something else. And it's just because you've had a head start. And I don't know, at least for me, that makes me feel like I'm a better cook when I've been at home for a few days versus when I've like come back from a trip and I'm just like, egg, tortilla.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we're definitely like right now, I feel like we are at a place with our kitchen and like our kitchenware and our ingredients and our all of these different things where it's sort of like, and I do think it's not an easy place to get to all the time for people that are starting from scratch with cooking, but where it's just like there's like some gear, not really gadgets, but just sort of like reliable like tools, and there's like a pantry of spices and different things, and there's almost just a like root cellar of like knowing you probably have a few onions around and some garlic and different stuff, and knowing, and in our case, our quote unquote root cellar is a cardboard box in our hall closet, and maybe that's a bad place for all that stuff to be, but it's working for right now.
Yeah,
it just is like, once you can be looking at recipes and things that you want to make and go like, oh yeah, we have 7 out of 10 of these things. It's just like less of a mental thing to tackle. And when you're trying to like plan for the week, you go like, oh, and then even if we did have to get something new, I know that I have half of that left over after that other thing. And I totally know what you mean. It was interesting what you said. It almost seems like what you're saying is like, obviously restaurants need to have service to make money to survive, but they also need to have service as a sort of just a like thing to be working towards, or almost a like off gassing of this, all of this. It's like, we need to be like putting things out there in order to be bringing more things in and developing this pantry of all of this stuff that we have to like work with in order to make things at the level that we want to be making them.
Yeah. The thing that like every 19-year-old cook in 2004 got tattooed on their forearm, the whole mise en place idea. It was so interesting. I thought, so mise en place means things in place. And I think anybody who's ever watched Top Chef has watched somebody like just getting bleeped to high heaven talking about somebody fucked with my mise. And it's this like very chefy thing. But for me, when I was first getting into cooking and food, I was watching like Emeril, and I was fascinated by those little clear bowls of like diced red pepper that he always had. And how he's like making a Denver omelet, and he's like, already got ham diced up and already got eggs whisked and all that stuff. I thought that was the thing that made restaurant cooking what it was like putting stuff into little bowls and like chopping everything first, which is, I guess that's part of it. But the mise en place thing is just living in an engine that churns through food. And hopefully, like in a lot of people's houses, I think people are starting to understand that like it's a lot easier to make some crazy stew when you already have a really good stock that you already made, when you already have pickles that you have been working on, you already have like good paprika that you have an understanding. Like all of these little things kind of come together, and every little building block, every roadblock that you can take out of your way, like you can cook stuff in 20 minutes that if you were starting from complete scratch would take 24 hours. And it was interesting, you're talking about like getting like your rig set up for all the stuff that you need to cook at home. Truly today, my wife and I are like downsizing all of our cooking shit, because we realize we've been cooking every single day since March, and we use our cast iron pan, one stainless steel saute pan, like Dutch oven pot, and a nonstick, and the other 15 pieces of super heavy cookware that I had to buy and bring back in a backpack from Europe, and needed to go the first time I ever went to New York to this, pilgrimage to this cookware store and buy all this stuff. I don't really use it. And so we're actually just starting to downsize because we kind of realize that the kind of food that we like to cook, you just kind of need a base layer of how to make stuff hot and crispy, and then dance around it with all the garnishes that you've saved up for the past 3-4 months of losing your mind. And it works. Right. It's really tasty.
You have the sample size of like, we've been cooking literally every meal. We have like now such a good sample size to work from to know like who are the A players in our kitchen, basically.
Yeah.
And we can kind of get rid of everything else, or like we can feel comfortable enough letting go of that stuff, knowing like we probably won't miss it. And if we do miss it, it's going to be 1 out of every 100 times.
Those 12-piece like wedding registry, like all-clad sets are a just complete racket. Like, ignore it. All you need is a pan that you like to cook in, a bigger pan that you like to cook in, a big pot, a small pot. And like, honestly, that's kind of it. For almost everything that you want to cook, there is a way to do it in those 4 pieces of cookware, and then maybe like a cookie sheet and a wire rack for the oven, a good cutting board, 3 knives, and a blender. Like I don't like there are ways to make almost anything with that baseline, and it's funny. Like I was once very much sucked in by the like sur la table garlic press energy. Yeah. And like, ooh,
which is exactly what the letters in my giant gold necklace did.
Yeah, exactly. And it they like come in chrome, and it's like this this is the whisk that will finally round out your set of whisks. Any real culinarian, if you want to cook like the pros, you got to get this whisk because other whisks are for suckers. And the truth is, like, you could literally use your hand if you had to, like, make some eggs work. Or like all my friends who are cooks and also parents are like, this is actually a thing that I have had a conversation unprompted with 2 different cook friends on this. They're like, I've reached the point in my life where I don't even whip the scrambled eggs before pouring them into the pan. And I knew exactly what they were talking about of being so tired that you just crack an egg into a pan and then just go at it with a spatula as quick as you can before it cooks fully. I don't know. I think in quarantine, we have started taking ourselves way less seriously in how we cook. And I think this is the best home cooking. This is the most I've ever enjoyed the food that I've cooked at home is over the past 6 months. And maybe that's because I've like got time to literally watch peaches ripen on the counter. And which plays into, you were talking about that Chez Panisse article. Mm-hmm. Just having time to think about dinner brings a lot of joy. And when it's not just one more thing on a to-do list, it's nice. Though that is a luxury for pretty much everybody. That is not going to be an everyday thing. But being able to like have premeditated dinner is a really lovely thing. And I hadn't had it in a while.
So that sort of brings me to a question that I usually ask in the first 5 minutes, and we're almost an hour in. So
sorry we jumped so far.
I think what I'm trying to say is you may have to be a like bi-monthly guest on the
I'm around as often as you want to do this. I'm in a very small closet in our house, and it is cooler here than literally anywhere else in the North Bay. So I'm down to be here as often as I need to. I will take this hit.
Well, much appreciated. Happy to give you an excuse to flee to the panic room. Mm-hmm. But where does home cooking fit in or not fit into your life right now? It sounds like very, very well. And what has sort of defined that pandemic era cooking for you? Like, what do you think are the common threads that you guys are finding as you're sort of, as you said, like thinking about things a little bit more, but also taking yourself a little less seriously when you make dinner?
That's great. Way more herbs than would make the average American comfortable is kind of my whole brand right now. So in general, home cooking is, I don't know, for a long time I lived in places that didn't have great restaurant scenes. Like suburban Denver was like, you'd have to drive far to have a really good meal. And so we could get our hands on really good produce, and everybody in my family and then eventually me were really into cooking. So we're like, we make better food than the Qdoba that was down the street. No shots at Qdoba, but you know, it has a time and place. And so that has kind of been it for a long time. Now home cooking, I don't know, it has somehow become like a politically charged thing to leave the house as little as possible. And it's, as always, food is the nexus of kind of everything that's going on in a person's life. And now there's almost no veil to hide that. So home cooking, it is, yes. Like that would be my answer, is yes. But in terms of like the approach and the mantra and the kind of things that we're cooking a lot, I say we because I met my wife, and my move was like 5 years ago when we were dating was, I'm going to impress you with food, because I thought that was a great move. Now she can see through all of my bullshit because she's like able to make dinner as equally as delicious as I could. And so when I'm like, this was really awesome, she was like, yeah, but it took 2 minutes. But so my wife and I cook a lot, and the things that we are cooking a lot, like I said, are way too many herbs. I think this is a question that I get a lot in like, I don't know, article interviews and stuff. What's your go-to ingredient? My go-to ingredient is take every recipe that calls for any amount of herbs and quintuple it. Like the meme right now of like way too many cloves of garlic when a recipe says only 5 or whatever. Do that for herbs And as long as it's parsley, cilantro, basil, tarragon, anything apart from maybe like rosemary, you cannot overdo it on herbs. Like truly, I mean it. Like we go through an entire head of cilantro in a single meal, in addition to an entire head of parsley, in addition to a bunch of tarragon, thyme, mint. Mint is another one that you cannot overdo. And the general approach is herbs seasoned with salt, some kind of sour thing, whether that's lemon juice or lime juice or vinegar, and oil, olive oil, toasted sesame oil, whatever you have around, is like a foolproof seasoning. You can just dress torn herbs like salad and put it on top of literally anything. You could take that and put it into a food processor and make like a pesto with no name because it has, whatever ingredients you want to put into it. It is kind of like the foundation of everything that we do. And I don't know why. It just kind of came out of nowhere. I was like, herbs are good. And then we just started, our household term for herbs is, hey, how much basil? One of us will inevitably yell, I don't know, just fuck it in there. So like that is, I think a fun hack is a bunch of herbs in everything that you're doing. And weirdly, we have started, like if you think of in culinary school, they teach the peace sign plate, where it's like you divide a plate into a few different zones. One zone for meat, one zone for green vegetables, one zone for starch. It kind of makes like a 3-part peace sign outline. It had that was outdated a really long time ago, but now, it's really, really outdated. And the way that we've been figuring out what to have for dinner has almost 100% of the time started from what produce do we have that's like perfect right now. And that's partially a California thing, but I kind of think it can be an anywhere thing. Like if you have a giant head of cabbage that you need to figure out how to get through, that kind of sets the tone more than being like, I feel like steak tonight. Or we found somebody with really great potatoes, or a friend gave us some rice from a farm that they'd visited. Or it was kind of like go from the produce stuff first and then figure out we're in our household, we're totally omnivores, but then like figure out the animal stuff later. Like most of our meals start with, okay, we're going to have eggplant. And then it ends up being like eggplant with carnitas or eggplant with duck or eggplant with chicken or whatever, kind of as an afterthought. Like meat as a condiment has kind of become more of our go-to in quarantine. And I don't know why that is, but it's been really tasty.
Yeah, that, well, first of all, the idea that you could use or should be using an entire thing of cilantro in a meal for 2 people is so liberating to me, because I feel like you basically have to do that if you ever want to use all of that cilantro.
Yeah, because otherwise it's going to turn into brown mush in like 24 hours, and there is no hack to prevent that from happening.
Right. Yes. Okay. That makes me feel at least a little bit better than I'm like, I'm wondering, is there some obvious trick I'm missing? And I think the obvious trick that you're saying is eat it.
Yeah. Although I will say, if you want to buy yourself like a tiny window, a very damp, cold paper towel with a completely dry paper towel sandwiched together and wrapped around the herbs in a sealed bag in the fridge, it's the best way that I've found of how to do it. Dry paper towel touching the herbs, damp paper towel on the outside. You kind of make a herb burrito. But yeah, like blasting a bunch of herbs into stuff, it makes things taste intensely vibrant and flavorful and just good in whatever cuisine you want to do. Like whenever we go to the farmer's market or grocery store or whatever, we buy like one bunch of mint, one bunch of parsley, and then kind of whatever else looks good. And we do that about 3 times a week. And then on the flip side, it takes us like probably 9 days to get through a chicken. Because we'll like roast a chicken one day, use one of the breasts for something that night, use the other one for something for lunch the next day, turn the thighs into congee or something, And then we have bones that we're turning into broth. And then every once in a while we'll like resimmer the bones, or like it can truly keep going. And then the day the last bit of that chicken is done is often more than a week out, which is just so the opposite of how I and most people that I know grew up eating, where it's like, we're having flank steak tonight, and you buy like 2 pounds of steak and have it for the meal. There's fully nothing wrong with just really going hard on a giant like side of meat, but for whatever reason, it's kind of taken a back seat, and truly with like no like agenda or mission statement behind it. It's just like we've had awe-inspiring produce for the past several months that has just been better. So it's been cool.
Are we crazy, or and granted we live in slightly different places, but I feel like we're probably geographically close enough that we're getting, it's the same effect. Mm-hmm. Citrus this year has been so goddamn good over the summer. For some, I feel like in I don't know, why would that be? Are we crazy? Because also I think of like, I feel like I learned a few years ago, it's like, oh, most, citrus season is like in the winter is when it's really good. And I can't understand why it's been so good like in the spring and summer this year when literally nothing else about the world has been.
I mean, climate change. It can also be good. That's the real bitch of it. Like, that's a super unfortunate thing, is before it all takes its final turn super south, we may end up having like a 4-year span of like the most delicious watermelon you've ever had in your life, before like watermelon becomes $100 a pound because there's not enough water. But like right before that, there may be some weird things with climate change that are like perfectly suited to growing like the best pineapples that have ever been grown in Wisconsin for like a few years. Again, not promoting climate change, but that's a kind of gallows humor thing that like literally might be true. So I don't know what's going on with citrus. I have been like spank banking pictures of peaches and plums that I've eaten this year, like literally cutting them open, like finding perfect diffuse morning light through a window, and like taking thirst trap photos of like my entire camera roll for the past couple months has been like a 15 photo set of a Flavor King pluot. And I'm like, Instagram is going to want this content at some point. So it's like rainy day fun for me to think about. But yet the fruit in general, and I eat a borderline psychotic amount of fruit. Like truly what we just we're talking about.
Steve Jobs level fruitarian.
Like status. Along with other stuff, I still eat normal meals, but I'm not kidding. I will eat 5 pounds of fruit in a day. And it's just my favorite thing. And the fruit that we've had this year, this has probably been the best year of summer like stone fruit that I have ever seen. So it's just ending, and like I saw the first pomegranates in the grocery store the other day, and I was like, fall. Which whatever, like there's a fruit for every season. Speaking of citrus, have you ever had a Sumo mandarin?
I think so. The name rings a bell.
It is the greatest thing that has happened to winter since I don't really know how to finish that setup, but it's a great thing that will happen to you this winter. It's like a giant, it looks like a giant orange with like a really aggressively pseudo-sexual nubbin on the end of it. It kind of looks like a Bourbon from Mario. It's like exactly that shape. And it is super easy peeling. It's like those clementines that just fall out of their skin. And it was bred, not like GMO, like just old school horticulture dude in a orchard, like trying to get trees to bang for a couple decades. It was bred by this really incredible plant scientist who is just like an orange breeder. And over the course of, I think literally like 2 or 3 decades, was just trying to crossbreed different kinds of mandarins and clementines and oranges until he got this thing, the Sumo mandarin. It's like actually a branded like specific type of citrus that has what they call a really high sugar acid ratio. So some people really like sour, tangy citrus fruits. Some people like really sweet ones. This one turns the volume up on both to maximum so that it's like really balanced, but like THX, like preview in a movie theater, like it's crazy and delicious. And the cool thing about citrus is, unlike stone fruit, where like again, I before we moved to Colorado when I was growing up, I was born in Central Texas in Austin, in a state that supposedly has really good peaches. I'm sorry to report that Texas's peaches are complete bullshit compared to California. And California stone fruit and stone fruit in general doesn't really travel well. So that's why you hear about like Georgia peaches or Texas peaches or California peaches. Citrus travels really, really well. So it's kind of, when I need a fruit fix and I'm in like Detroit and it's February, there's a lot of really good food in Detroit. Fruits are not as abundant in the middle of the winter in Michigan. But you can find Sumos because citrus travels really well, and they're in like almost every grocery store, and they are truly mind-blowing. It's our absolute go-to from like any Ralph's or any Albertsons, any Safeway. They're like always going to have Sumos in the winter, and there's always like a little like for me it almost works like a bug zapper. There's like a little Sumo display in almost every grocery store, and I mean they will reupholster your couch. Like it's like it's
Noted.
delicious.
Wow, yeah, that I do think it's always good to know that it's like, okay, not everything is going to be good all the time everywhere, but if you can know about the things, like that's how I feel about like learning, where I learned like, oh yeah, tomatoes obviously are super finicky, and so many tomatoes now are so bad, but like if you have to have tomatoes and you're somewhere where the tomatoes aren't good or they're out of season or whatever, it's like cherry tomatoes are probably going to be better than like a big old beefsteak tomato in terms of like giving you the most tomato-ness for your money, you know, agnostic to like where you are and what time of year it is.
That's
I love knowing stuff like that.
Have you had Sungolds?
Again, I'm not sure.
So Sungold,
I don't think so.
There's like Sungold tomatoes, which are these little orange cherry tomatoes that are available in like clamshells in almost every grocery store, and they're grown in greenhouses, so they're good year round. They're like they are a tomato that friends who run restaurants who have like their fancy dedicated farm, they will plant Sungolds because they're just that good of a tomato. So Sungolds anywhere. This is great. This is like the road trip produce survival kit. Sungold's anywhere.
That's right.
I mean, like Honeycrisp apples are always going to be good wherever you are. The Sumo citrus. There's got to be a couple others. Oh,
I'm literally taking notes as though this isn't being recorded.
I love it.
But
I am a sucker. Have you?
Oh, please.
Last one. I am a sucker for anything that is packaged in a grocery store as like special boutique fruit.
Sure.
I went to Tokyo with my friend Kyle, who's a chef from Southern California who speaks fluent Japanese, and I was like, somebody could have completely like scammed me over with fruit because it was so beautifully presented and everything felt special in like these really beautiful gleaming Tokyo specialty food shops that we would go to. So I am a total sucker for like the honeypot trap with like special looking fruit. And this is another thing I've noticed in Whole Foods and like places like Target and Walmart that have produce sections. People are starting to realize that you can hook people with cool looking fruit. And so if you ever see like a special blueberry or like apricots or plums that are like encased in their own little clamshell or their own little bag, and they're always named like really fanciful names like Candy Cloud or that I think is actually a real one, or like Unicorn Tear, which was I think a name of a golden raspberry that I saw one time. Whatever that is always good, and it's one of those like stupid impulse luxury buys that costs $6. Like that's kind of the thing that I really like about fruit, and that I wrote in that Chez Panisse article is like, in this world where luxury is so often lobster and foie gras and $1,000 for a meal for 2 people, and all these things that maybe we should not be allowed to afford. Fruit, like the best fruit in the world, costs like $5 for a mouthful. And you can treat yourself to that. And it's something that makes me feel warm and fuzzy about fruit. This ends my fruit manifesto. Thank you.
No, and unfortunately it doesn't, because I want to stay here for a second, and we'll end on this. Okay. We'll end on this because I was so astounded by this article that you wrote about Chez Panisse and their famous, like, I've never been, but I've read tons about it, seen documentaries, et cetera, et cetera. They have this famous fruit bowl, as you described, that's like everything about their menu changes. It's hyper seasonal, but they always have this fruit bowl. And the idea is basically that, like, it's just the best fruit, and that the way that they are going to be presenting you with, like, the best fruit, and the way that they're guaranteeing that is because they are, it's an overused turn of phrase, but like an obsessive level of attention to detail for this fruit. The fruit that they get is constantly being, like, monitored and placed into sort of different buckets, being used in these different ways, like being hyper, like, specifically aged to exactly the right, like, moment that it's going on your plate. And all of the fruit is just allowed to, like, truly live its best life. Like, every piece of fruit gets to achieve, like, its most perfect destiny is basically what you described in this article. And then also conversely, or not conversely, because even the stuff where it's like, oh, this is of course still really, really good fruit because we're getting it from really great farmers. We're in, Northern California, all this different stuff. There's still, I loved a detail that I loved was that they have a designation called NFFB, not for fruit bowl.
Yeah. Didn't make the cut.
Which is
their junior varsity.
The fruit that doesn't, yes, but still, as you say in the article, like, gets made into, still amazing food, and it's going to get used because it's still really, really, really good. And what I'm wondering is, how do we get that, but for home? Because something that we've been experiencing this summer is, like, we'll get, like, our little CSA box every week. And that's been great. And there was, like, a point early in the pandemic where we were literally leaning on it way too much. And we realized that they have, like, meat and dairy you can get. And so us and a billion other panicky Southern Californians were, like, logging on to and crashing their website every day when the boxes would become available. And now we've, like, settled into a pretty good rhythm with it. But one thing that has been frustrating is we'll get really beautiful stone fruit from them, and then we would put it in this bowl that Haley's brother got us. That's this, like, beautiful, decorative, artistic fruit bowl. And then we would be like, oh, right, we have these peaches, and this is after, like, a day and a half, and we would take one of them out just to be like, there's no way this is going to be ripe yet. And it would be like, one side of it is completely hard and one side of it is a failed state. Like, it's just like a mush parade. And then we were like, okay, we can't put them in the fruit bowl anymore. You know what let's do is we'll keep them far apart from each other, because we know enough to know that it's, like, emitting some sort of enzyme or something that is, like, once one of them starts rotting, it's going to emit a thing that's going to make everybody start going bad. And so then what we ended up with is our really, really scientific, I would almost call it like a pylon system, where just, like, all of the different little, like, bottles of, like, honey and different, like, pantry stuff that we just have sitting out on our counter, like 4 or 5 of those at any given time will have, like a bottle of vinegar will just have, like, a peach balanced on top of it, and a bottle of honey will have an apricot balanced on top of it. But they're, like, it's like social distancing for fruit. So it's our sort of, like, okay, everybody stay, 6 feet apart from each other. And for whatever reason, there was, like, 1 week where we first started it and it was, like, working okay. But even now, still, we'll find that exact same thing where it'll just be like, oh, we just got this and it looked great. And then we turn it around and there's, like, clearly one little imperfection that is now turned into, this entire side of it is just, like, melting away. What are we doing wrong, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Let me just start by saying I am so thrilled to see what the SEO keyword tags are going to be for this episode of this podcast. Like, the peach heads out there are going to come out in droves. Okay, I'm going to try to answer this succinctly, and it's not going to work. So, everything that you're just describing is absolutely the right path. This is a weird subject because kind of my like career mission is to demystify cooking and make it less intimidating and more exciting for people. This is maybe one of the only situations where the only way to do better is to work harder. So let me put it this way. The genius of the Chez Panisse fruit ball is they treat figs and persimmons and even things like dates. Like I'm Iranian. I grew up eating dates. I have eaten more dates than you in a week of my childhood than in probably your whole life. And I thought like dates were binary. I thought dates were just like a commodity staple. Like, hey, buy dried beans. They will like bench ripen dates to put in this fruit bowl. So they treat fruit in this fruit bowl like I think the rest of us would understand reasonably treating like an entree. So it sounds crazy to say that they're like have this system of color coding and constant like rotating and literal curation in the truest expression of that word of fruit. But it doesn't sound that crazy to say like, okay, this steak is perfect. It's hot and ready. Don't let it die in the window. Get this out to the table. Have them eat it now. Or like a really amazing slice of pizza. There's kind of only gonna be one moment where it's got like crunchy crust and the cheese is all stringy and it's, you know, piping hot and all these things. Or I guess even better would be like fried chicken. Fried chicken like straight out of the fryer basket, perfectly seasoned where it's just like just cool enough to eat and it's still crackly and juicy and all that sort of stuff. The idea that that is a fleeting moment that you need to pounce on like a wolf makes sense to people intuitively. Fruit has that too. And it's easier to miss, not to get too like Ferris Bueller philosophy, but it's easy to miss that moment because it's on a time delay. It happens like 10 times slower. Like you can instead of having a 6-minute window for the perfect amount of time to eat like fried chicken, and honestly after that it's still fried chicken, it's still gonna be good. But everybody I think has had an experience with a taco or fried chicken or a poached egg or a piece of pizza where you've been like, wow, that was like the moment for that thing. Or nachos. For fruit, I would say most of it has like a 6-hour window. Some fruit like literally has like some kind of melons will have an hour window. There are melons that like you don't have to be a foodie. There are certain types of melons that if you cut them at exactly the right time in their like ripening arc, they will taste like bubblegum and a pine forest and your grandma and hope and friendship and Smarties all at once. And it's like it's this thing that I think gets kind of passed over because it happens just slowly enough that it's not like an event. It's not like kids, the casserole's on the table, come before it gets cold. It's like kids eat the melon, you know, this afternoon before it gets bad. And so I think that's one of the reasons we don't think about it. But that is what they do at Chez Panisse. They treat peaches like, all right, we got to cook this to perfect medium rare. Only they're just going to ripen it to perfect medium rare. And so for doing it at home, exactly what you described is how I would do it. Like, engage in dialogue with your fruit. Notice what ripens where. Notice patterns. Anything. You know that thing where toast is like you put a piece of bread into a toaster and it's pale white, pale white, pale white, pale white, light brown, completely charcoal burnt.
Yes.
That is actually an accelerating reaction. Like that's not just a perception thing. That's literally how the chemistry works. Is once the browning reactions start, they snowball, and it goes from lightly toasted to burnt in like a fraction of the time that it goes from pale to lightly toasted. Same thing with fruit. And you can start to notice when fruit is accelerating. There have been, truly, I think, I've been lucky that I like the person that I'm married to. We've had maybe 3 actual arguments during quarantine, which is saying something because the nature of our jobs, we haven't actually lived in the same place for months on end ever in our relationship until now. We've only had like 3 arguments this entire time. 2 of them have been because of fruit. There have been nights when we bought a flat of nectarines and going through basically anything that's bruised, if it's really ripe and it's really good, it's not going to be good hours from now. Like it's not going to last until the morning. So there have been nights where like we're trying to finish the penultimate episode of Breaking Bad and I'm like in the kitchen, like not letting us continue with the episode because I have to like eat 3 super ripe nectarines over the sink. I'm not kidding. Like there's fruit. It's just like sourdough starter. I mean, it's like, it's ready now. This is on the fruit's terms. It's not on your terms. So that's number 1 is just accepting that if you want your fruit to be this insane, you have to meet it in terms of the insanity that you're putting forth into the equation. And honestly, having cold, non-porous surfaces. So like we have your standard like fake granite countertops in our kitchen that are typically a little bit colder than the rest of the house. We put all of our fruit stem side down in a single layer. Fruit bowls are just a beautiful idea, and they're terrible in practice for fruit that ripens. Almost exclusively, like hard, not really particularly ripening fruit goes into our fruit bowls. So like apples, bananas by themselves, because bananas will corrupt everything with their hormones. Citrus fruit, because citrus fruit actually doesn't ripen after it's picked. That's probably what goes into our fruit bowls. But right now, we just got back from shopping this morning. We have 17 peaches, each individually placed stem side down, with not touching anything else, all flat on a counter. On another counter, we have a bunch of really soft pears that are kind of by a window so that they don't accumulate a bunch of their own hormones and ripen themselves too quickly. And then in another area are some plums that I've kind of left haphazardly clustered together because I want them to mix it up a little bit and get a little bit riper. And then tomorrow they will join the rank and file peaches in like a really ordered thing. Which, so I just want to like be self-aware. I know that this is fucking insane. But I have to tell you that like I grew up, I was the kid who grew up drinking like 3 sodas a day, and I would just like pound a bag of Doritos with like an entire jar of paste pecani sauce as like my snack before my ice cream float with my 4th soda. And like I grew up eating the junkiest of junk food as a teenager, and the way that I flattened my curve on the junk food. I still eat Doritos and all of these things are great. But the way that I started eating like a human was learning how like eye-poppingly good, really good fruit can be. And it makes me happy. So I would say you guys are on absolutely the right track. My friends in the industry and even like my in-laws and stuff have constant text conversations about weird food ephemera questions that come up. A lot of it is about fruit. So if you ever have a question about fruit, just shoot me a text and we'll get that melon ripe.
Yeah, because I do want to taste the pine forest in it for sure.
This is a true offer. This is not like a podcast bullshit. When we are out of the pandemic and a eternal night of fascism is maybe not on the horizon, truly come up to the Bay Area, and at some point we can go to either Chez Panisse or just to a farmer's market or something. And I would love to set you and your wife up with whatever the best fruit is of the moment, and we can make an afternoon of it.
That is a beautiful offer, and I will 1,000,000% take you up on this. And I do think that there is a type of personality, and I have it, where you could turn someone into literally a fruitarian like the sort of, I think, pretty discredited, weird fruit only diet.
Yeah.
Based on this description of it. Cause that's the one thing that I really enjoyed about the Chez Panisse article is you were sort of describing, why fruit ripens after it's, or why a lot of fruit ripens after it's picked. And the fact, that basically, which I sort of knew intellectually, but I really finally realized on a gut level was that like, it wants us to eat it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was the one. Yeah. That was the article where this was like maybe the pinnacle of my writing career is my editor, Paolo Lucchesi, former food editor for the San Francisco Chronicle, allowed the words, I think, botanical thirst trap to be published in the same newspaper that like Zodiac happened to. Like that historic legacy periodical allowed that phrase to be applied to fruit. And it's true. Like fruit wants you to get down. We force ourselves to eat vegetables like broccoli and onions and kale and all that stuff. They're good. Like I'm a human being. I understand that they're great. They're literally trying to poison you, and they're trying to tell you that they're poisonous by accumulating like bitter, irritating, burning, tingling compounds. Whereas fruit is like just wearing barely nothing at all and saying, "Hey, the water's just fine."
Yeah, it's in this moment of, as you described, like having this window of, I literally copied and pasted a paragraph from the article into my notes here that I loved, which was, and now this is not leading to a question because we covered all this. This is just going to be me reading you your own article, but that really caught my eye was ripening fruits drop their protective physical coatings of tough fibers and dampen chemical deterrents like astringent tannins and abrasive acids. Deep 401ks of starch are liquidated to fast cash in the form of sugar, and cell walls crumble to allow easier access to the sweetened nectar when bitten. Scraps of the disintegrating structures rocket upward to explode enchanting perfume into the air, and tasteful utilitarian green chlorophyll seeds the floor to garish pigments of every other color, a botanical everything must go banner hung high. Like the fruit, it's not only like what you're saying is like, cause I understand the sex metaphor, especially because it's trying to, reproduce. Like that's the reason that it's literally fruit. But there's almost it's like what I got from that is it's like a Glengarry, Glen Ross thing where it's just like the fruit is like, I gotta make this sale.
ABC.
It's like Gil in
ABC.
The Simpsons.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it truly is. It's exactly that. It must go. The literal future of the species depends on it every single time you want to eat a peach. And there's something, I don't know, like weirdly reassuring about that.
Absolutely.
That it can all
I loved it.
Yeah.
It really, I've always really liked peaches and apricots and stone fruit and stuff. But this really gave me a deeper appreciation of like why it is that when you hit it right with a good peach in that moment, it is really revelatory, is because its whole life has been building to that. And that's so neat and cool to me. And it's sort of like you are meeting it at exactly the right moment, I think is so neat. And you're right, does go very far beyond just like, hey, you can turn gravy into like a gel or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I'm really happy that you said that. And now I'm going to have to go and like pitch the Extreme Home Makeover production company on like a show where I just come in and rearrange the produce in people's houses and be like, do not put any of this in the fridge. What are you doing? I can be a little catty, I can be a little judgy, but overall nurturing and supportive. It'll be great.
So, okay, final,
Yeah.
I said last question, second to last question,
Sure.
and this is just for my own purposes. Tomatoes in the fridge, literally never?
Any literally never absolutist statement in food is being made by somebody who wants you to click on our article. Like, you don't have to ever take anything as complete gospel. Apart from maybe like literally don't ever eat raw chicken. Anything where safety is concerned, that can be a literally never. But no, I mean like when I get a like nice heirloom tomato that's like the size of a pumpkin. Like with no friends that I can share this with, just my wife and I, 2 people can't go through that amount of tomato in one sitting. And every once in a while, I don't want to like pain eat a tomato out of guilt. So it's only every once in a while, but you know, it happens. So yeah, we'll put it on a plate and stick it in the fridge. I will say that tomato may not capture the same, I mean, that tomato then becomes NFFB. It becomes not for fruit bowl. But like there's plenty of good shit you can do with a tomato. And so, yeah, in general, tomatoes and like most other fruits and vegetables are actually much better out of the fridge. But the cool thing about temperature is like things will also warm up again. So my advice is if you ever have a tomato that you like sliced and can't finish or whatever, you have a tomato in the fridge, bring it out of the fridge for like an hour or 2 until it gets warm. And then my favorite thing to do with it, with especially like a cut tomato that I had to put in the fridge, is let it get warm, toast some bread. On the cut side of the toast, once it comes out of the thing, take a raw garlic clove and grate it using the bread as the grater, and then repeat that using the cut side of the tomato, and grate the cut side of the tomato on the bread, salt, and a shitload of olive oil, and you've just joined most Spaniards in probably the best way to use a tomato in bread that exists in any culture. And truly that will never fail, because the other thing is with the refrigeration of the tomatoes, it's really more about like enzymes and launching some of those fireworks up into the air, some of the aroma fireworks. No better way to get that stuff rolling than like aggressively smashing open all of the party poppers, the microscopic little confetti cannons inside the tomato by grating it across hot bread. So there you go.
A dish, if you could call it that I just made on the show like a week or 2 ago.
Oh, really?
It's so good. I love it. Yeah.
Whose episode was that?
I think it was a week or 2 ago. It might have been literally the last one, but I was literally like, I don't want to be in the kitchen a bunch because it's really hot, and Haley just made some bread and we have some good tomatoes. So I'm just going to make like
it's incredible
Spanish style, like tomato and garlic on toast. I love it. It's so good.
It's fantastic.
And just the idea, yeah, exactly, that you can grate garlic onto toast using the toast itself is very pleasing to me.
It's less than a 1-pot meal. It's a no-pot meal. What did you cook? What did you cook this time?
This week it's in process right now, but I am just making some chicken wings or drumsticks rather in the slow cooker because I didn't want to turn the oven on because it's so hot today. So I'm literally making this week's one right now, but I may end up putting way more herbs on the chicken wings when they're done than I thought I was going to.
Oh yeah. Are you a Instapot or like a legacy crock pot kind of slow cooker?
Legacy crock pot. We haven't gotten an instant pot. Mm-hmm. I have friends who swear by them and they are very intriguing to me, but I have not had any firsthand experience with them.
I will tell you, I am, as we talked about, profoundly anti-gadget. I think most of them are stupid. And I spent however long an Instant Pot came onto the market until last Christmas, just vociferously hating on Instant Pot. My brother-in-law gave my wife and I an Instant Pot for Christmas, I think like the year before, and it sat unused until the pandemic hit, and then we started using it, and we have not used it for anything apart from pressure cooking. But pressure cooking is the revolution that people thought sous vide was going to be for the United States. Like pressure cooking is probably the only like new style of cooking that I think is still yet to change the entire game for like all of America. And the Instant Pot is probably the easiest form of pressure cooking that I've ever seen. And it grinched my heart like 3 sizes larger with how much I hate gadgets. It is one, like no free ads, but it is one that I find justifies its own existence.
Well, that makes me feel better because we've gotten them for other people. And so now I want somebody to return the favor.
Well,
this is exciting.
It's out in the world now.
Ali, my last question for at least part one of our untold many-part series of this conversation. What if there was, and this is an interesting question to ask. I normally ask this of people who are, home cooks in some way or another. And it's an interesting question, I feel like, for you in particular, because you're somebody that takes a very scientific approach to food, where I don't feel like there's a whole lot of things that you probably couldn't cook if you set your mind to it. But I think there's got to be something. So what I would love to know from you is like, what is something that either it's something that you ate all the time growing up, it has sentimental value for you, or it's just like the most mind-blowing thing that you've ever had at a like Michelin star restaurant in your entire life. There's something that you do not and cannot and have not currently cooked, but you would love to be able to snap your fingers and just know how to make perfectly. What would it be?
I'll give you a high and a low. The low is barbeque bread with Bulgarian feta cheese. So this is the thing. Like, this is my death row meal. Growing up, this is like pita and different kinds of flatbreads with feta in a bunch of different forms. Is just like it is the Persian, it's the Iranian pan con tomate. Like, it's the Iranian tomato bread. This is like the comfort food, the simple, wonderful staple. And for whatever reason, it's haven't come across any really great flatbread. LA is probably the best place in the United States to find some of the like most incredible flatbread you can imagine. And for me, if I could snap my fingers, I would have a freezer full of, there's one specific type of flatbread they call sangak, which is derived from the word for stones. It's like a flatbread that was draped over hot stones to cook. And it's like, just like straight up flatbread with sesame seeds, nigella seeds, and maybe some other like little seasonings and herbs on it, with Bulgarian feta cheese. So feta is another one of those things that most feta is amazing. But actually the best feta that I've ever had is the like bulk commodity stuff at any Middle Eastern grocery store. So like go to your local like Middle Eastern grocery, go into the back or in the side, wherever the like case of olives and stuff is in bulk. And if you see a big like Lexan clear container with brine and then just like paving stone sized slabs of feta, and they'll like cut it for you to order. They usually have French, Bulgarian, and sometimes Israeli. They're all really good. The Israeli is like really creamy and delicious. The French is usually really salty. The Bulgarian, for me, is super tangy, super salty, just funky enough that it works. Toast the bread when you get home, and then use the bread as like a little oven mitt grabber and just like grab cheese with the hot bread. That is my death row desert island meal. Thing that I would just snap my fingers and have is one of my absolute favorite chefs and friends is this guy named Nick Bala. Nick was one of the co-chefs of a restaurant in San Francisco for a long time called Bar Tartine. He went and did another restaurant called Duna, and now is just kind of doing a lot of really interesting things all over the place. Nick has the ability to ferment and cure and preserve stuff as base ingredients to make seemingly really simple food that has like quantum physics black hole levels of complexity of flavor that goes into it. And basically, if I could, when I'm like sick or when I'm feeling vulnerable or pessimistic about the world, the thing that I would love to snap my fingers and just have is a stew made by Nick. He's Hungarian. He's studied a lot about Japanese cooking, and he blends some East Asian and some Central European sensibilities into everything that he does, and it usually culminates in like fatty, savory broth with like some kind of legume or rice or potato, and then some kind of cheese he made himself, like typically sour cream or butter that he made himself, and then like just enough meat to to make it real. One of those stews is I wish I could have that.
Ooh, that sounds. Both of those things sound phenomenal. I'm kicking myself for not. I have had like on my sort of like LA culinary to-do list for a long time. Like, oh, there's lots of great Persian food here. I gotta get more of it, and just really haven't. And so now I'm glad that I've waited until it's like a little bit more complicated than just going to a restaurant and pointing at stuff.
In LA, I would say
super inspiring.
Yeah, in LA, I would say Wholesome Choice grocery store. I actually think that's in Orange County. They may have one that's closer to the city. Anyway, if you want to take a trip south for like 45 minutes, go there. It's like a Persian Whole Foods, and they have like hot items, and you can try a bunch of different stuff. And then they also have a really great selection of basically everything I described. And then also weirdly, I did another one of those articles that you were talking about on Kismet, and Sarah, the two sort of co-runners of Kismet, are not Iranian, but it is the most like it like twangs my soul strings more than any other restaurant food I've had. Like something about their sensibilities feels very much like the things that make my like childhood resonate. So Kismet would be a great place, and they do contactless, socially distant takeout. So
that is you're playing my song. Absolutely. Well, Ali, thank you. Yeah, we gotta try that. This has been mind blowing. I feel like I'm gonna storm into the kitchen, clear all of the various pantry stuff that we just have hanging out on the counter away, and just create the perfect surface where the just like phalanxes of fruit can be ripening, and then I can see them and remember that we have them, which I think is half the battle.
Heck yeah. Phalanxes of fruit spelled with a PH in both cases would be, I don't know, like a great...
It's like a jam band, I feel
It's like a Weird Al album name. It's perfect.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. This was really mind-blowing and exciting and inspiring, and I'm excited to never let a thing of cilantro go for more than one meal, and if I have to, I'm gonna wrap it in a paper towel burrito.
Heck yeah. Well, thank you. This was amazing. Thanks for getting really deep and weird, because that doesn't always get to happen, and it's great when it does.
All right, that is it. That is all for this week's episode of Stay for Dinner. Thank you to my guest, Ali Bouzari. Check out his book, Ingredient, Unveiling the Essential Elements of Food, wherever books are sold. And also, please rate and subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already. It helps people find the show, and that in turn helps there be more show. Please follow me at DC Pierson on Twitter, DEECEE Pierson on Instagram. And if you decide to cook along at home, please take a picture and tag me in it. I would love to see what you make. A little recap on the chicken wings, or drumsticks. I kept saying wings. I sort of use them interchangeably. At any rate, and it doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. They were really, really good. They definitely were sort of like falling off the bone because of the being in the slow cooker for a long time factor. And that you end up like getting just a lot more bones than you're used to in a usual chicken wing situation. So just be mindful of that. But they were really tender and really, really good. My intro song is July 4th, 2004 by Jason Anderson. My interstitial music is by Advanced Bass, the amazing Owen Ashworth. And my podcast art is by Sarah Beacon. That is Becan. I have written a couple of novels, The Boy Who Couldn't Sleep and Never Had To, and Crap Kingdom. Please check them out wherever fine books are sold. You can also get them on Audible in audiobook format. I read both of those, and I'm really liking bookshop.org recently is a website where you can purchase books online, and a portion of the proceeds goes to a fund that supports local independent bookstores nationwide. Check that out. Good place to get books right now, I think. In the meantime, I'll talk to you next week. Bye.